They say good things come in threes, and this is no exception. This is the most engrossed in the book I have been since I've started reading it. Part 1 I found unbelievably dry until Rhett Butler showed up. Part 2 was kind of interesting, getting a new perspective on the Civil War. But Part 3 is where it gets really interesting. So after the defeat at Gettysburg, it's becoming very apparent that the Confederacy is very much losing the war. Those that signed up for the state militia so they could get the glory of the Civil War but not have to see the battlefield are being sent off to the battlefield. And on top of that, even some former slaves are going in the promise of being freed. One of them, Scarlet, meets in town, known by the name of Big Sam. The main reason for this is because he's like 6'3". He's digging a ditch in the middle of a road, to which Scarlet's like, "What are you doing here?" Which Big Sam explains that he's joined the Confederate Army, and they are anticipating that William Tecumseh Sherman is on his way into town, and they want to be as prepared as possible. Now, if you know history, you know that Sherman was brutal. Basically, he took a platoon of ruthless troops and set fire to everything he touched. This would later be known as Sherman's March to the Sea. Every day, the fighting gets a little closer. What seemed like thunder off in the distance is all of a sudden a storm coming in a little closer with each passing day. And with this, Melanie is becoming more and more pregnant. And the day that the baby is ready to come out is the worst day possible. Scarlet gets up and notices that something is immediately wrong. There is not a sound. Usually Atlanta is quite hustle and bustle this early in the morning, but today there is nothing. All there is just the faint smell of smoke off in the distance. Even Scarlet could see the writing on the wall and knows that Sherman is on his way into town. And, of course, this is when Melanie starts having labor pains. At first, she is a little nervous, until she realizes that the one servant left because everybody sought refuge in a distant town of Macon, named Prissy, is often going about how she's an excellent midwife. But this was all just a means to sound very impressive, as when Scarlet asks her what the first step to be, she utters the famous lines, "I know nothing about birthing no babies." And so Scarlet remembers the doctor. Now, the local doctor knew that Melanie was going to have a very hard time with this kid. Her hips were so narrow to be able to get that baby out of there, and on top of that, she has barely no chest to speak of, so the baby's going to need to find some other source of nourishment. At first, Scarlet sends Prissy while she tends to Melanie's needs. However, Prissy comes back after like an hour and a half and no luck. To which Scarlet says, "Fine, I will go down there myself." To which Prissy tries her best to attend to Melanie's needs. Now, it's interesting to note that this scene did make it into the movie, but obviously heavily censored. When Scarlet starts her way down to the hospital, there is just piles upon piles of bodies. Some that are dead, some that are dying, and some just wondering what is the next step. And all the way, Scarlet has to be really dainty with where she places her feet, as there's been a few groans from people that are just still clinging to life. She is able to find the doctor covered in blood like the busy butcher that he is. He is obviously beside himself as he has a lot of work cut out and most of the nurses have left town already. So when he sees Scarlet's face, he's just kind of like, "Oh, thank goodness, I got so many people here. How about you get on a scrub and then we can take care of all these people?" "What? The baby? You got to take care of that yourself, Chad. Look at all this work I have. If I leave now, all these people will die. You just have to do it." These were obviously not the words that Scarlet wanted to hear in this moment. But with no other choice, she heads back, disappointed, trying to recall all the events that happened when she herself was pregnant. However, it's kind of hard to pay attention when you're in that much pain and screaming your head off. But with Prissy, they set out to accomplish this mission. It is nighttime, where Scarlet is just wiping her head off in relief in the nice, cool night air, as opposed to the hot, sweaty house that she just came from. The baby did make it, and Melanie is alive, but she is resting from just pure exhaustion. And all the way, Scarlet is just blaming Prissy for all the mistakes that she made along the way. But all in all, everything went all right. But Scarlet looks off in the distance, and what was only smoke this morning has turned into a glowing fireball that is just slowly getting closer and closer into town. Scarlet knows that she must escape. She has been very much tempted to just leave Melanie this whole time, but she can't break her promise to Ashley. So, Scarlet sends Prissy to look for the one man that could help them out of this. Rhett Butler. After all, in part 2, he already had a very nice horse and buggy to begin with. When Rhett does show up, you see the most deplorable animal that is just barely clinging on to life with gigantic sores where the whip has been brought down after years of use. And the carriage he's in is not in much better shape. To which Rhett obviously has a little fun with Scarlet, saying, "You really put me in quite a spot, girl. You turned me into a horse thief, and right after I was about to win a fantastic hand of poker." So, where are we headed? To which Scarlet says, back to Tara. Rhett tries everything in his power to convince her that that is a horrible idea. However, Scarlet doesn't care, especially with letters that have been coming in saying that Ellen has come down with the typhoid. She wants to see how she is doing, and since every mother is invincible, she just wants to be able to sit down in her lap and bawl her eyes out over everything that she's witnessed since the war started. They tread very lightly, as even though the horse and the carriage are in really deplorable shape, they are still worth their weight in gold. So, they have to take all the back roads, because if they are seen, either side is going to want to steal it for their own gain. They make their way through Atlanta. The further they go, it just looks like the gates of hell have opened up. And part of the burning is even on the Confederate side. Realizing that there is no way to defend the city, they decide to set fire to all the major buildings, such as the munitions depot, as well as several other key command posts. Along the way, they pass by a zombie crew, reflecting back to when this war first started, that they would get these dang Yankees licked within a mere week. It has been about 4 years now, and only now are they starting to realize that they could lose the war. With all of them beside themselves, they were able to pass real easily through these people, and they start making their way through the back roads. But just as they are about halfway there, that scene really starts affecting Rhett, and all of a sudden he wants to join the Confederacy. To which Scarlet is just kind of like, out of all times to grow a conscience when I need you the most to be able to get me through the treacherous part of the journey, you want to join the very administration that shunned you so much? Which all of a sudden he kind of becomes a gentleman for a brief moment and talks about the honor he has, as well as just the guilt he's seen with all those Confederate soldiers. So at this, Scarlet is obviously beside herself, bawling her eyes out. And even more interesting about this part is that her little child Wade actually has a bearing on the story. The whole time they are exiting, little Wade is just kind of like, "Mommy, I'm scared the Yankees are coming." And the whole time Scarlet just has no patience for this and keeps going, "Shut up! Get in the carriage. We're gonna get to safety real quickly. Just stop giving away our position." Scarlet decides to take a little nap to just kind of put things into perspective, and then she decides to start off in the morning. There, the hopes of returning to Tara get a little more bleak with each passing mile. Along the way, it's just a haunted forest full of death. You got horses. You got people. What used to be houses are now just burned out shells with only really chimneys remaining. But still, the horse is barely even going to make it one way, and she's too far in now to be able to give up. Especially now that the house that she was living in is probably on fire at this point. But a little bit of luck does run their way, as a loose cow comes up beside them. And from what Prissy can tell, even though she is utterly terrified of cows, is that this cow needs to be milked. And so, that can act as some sustenance for Melody's baby. And if worse comes to worst, maybe a meal for everybody else. So they take the cow and they slowly keep going on their way to Tara. There's still really no signs of life. Everything else is just burned. But when she does get to Tara, she realizes that it is still standing. Her hopes went up for a little bit until she realizes that there's not a single light on in the place. She goes to the door and knocks to find Gerald just as much in a zombie state as those soldiers coming out from the gates of hell. He tells Scarlet that Ella died just yesterday, and that her sisters also got the typhoid, but they are slowly on the mend. And as you could tell, this is taking quite an emotional toll on Gerald. However, he is able to relate what exactly happened and why Tara was spared. The Yankees did indeed come by and try to burn down the place like all the others, but Gerald, having a sick wife in the house, as well as sick kids, says, "You have to burn this place on top of me. There is nothing in the world you can do to get me to move." The Yankees, however, do yield a little bit, but at a cost. That house becomes the headquarters for the ongoing campaign of nearby Jonesboro. The Yankees leave, leaving very little to eat or even just to be able to survive at Tara. In fact, they have only got one candle, and that is why there is no light on at Tara. However, there is a little bit of hope, as the Yankees have no idea what sweet potatoes are, and they just have a giant stash of it. And on top of that, Mammy was able to get a few apples. Nothing that's necessarily fresh, but it's at least something to be able to survive on. Scarlet then goes out to the garden to see the sweet potatoes, to which she proclaims, "As long as I am alive, I will never go hungry again." And to just kind of tell you how much the movie cut out, that is where part 1 ends. Now, in addition to taking all the provisions, most of the slaves also left with the Yankees as well, not only for fear of being seen as co-conspirators to the rebellion, but also for them to have their freedom. However, there are a few that remained. One of them, thankfully, just had a baby, and that is another way that Melanie's new child is able to get some fresh milk as well. In the past times, such a thing would have been very much unheard of, but this is a very desperate time, and such a thing as the social order, so to speak, is something that can go by the wayside. Scarlet tries her best to be able to get Tara back up and running, and the main thing she wants to do is replant the cotton, as that was the last thing that the Union officers did before they left the place, is they burned the entire stash of cotton, which, with the Confederate dollar being as worthless as it is, cotton is the only way to be able to pay the taxes. And, as I stated before, such a thing is quite a precious commodity. At first, Scarlet very much sees this as beneath her, but at the same time she realizes that she either does this or she starves. And most of the other people there were starting to feel the same thing. None of them really wanted to go out into the fields and start planting as well as picking the cotton. But, once again, desperate times is forcing desperate measures. All seems to be going okay when everybody except for Scarlet and Melanie is out on a foraging mission to try to get some more food. there is a lone horse and buggy that comes by. It's a Union soldier, looking to be able to take whatever treasures are left at Terra. Obviously, Scarlet is quite terrified until she remembers Charles's service revolver. And it's pretty amazing that this scene also made it into the movie as well, and, well, it's actually not all that censored either. Scarlet takes the gun, aims for his face, to which it just kind of becomes one bloody stump. Well, in the movie, it fell down to the ground before you could see that, but either way, the officer is dead, to which off in the distance you could just hear little meek footsteps, as well as the sound of dragging iron. Behind Scarlet is Melanie, with Charles's grandfather's war sword, being prepared to do the very same thing that Scarlet did. They both look at each other with mutual admiration, which for Scarlet is a pretty big thing, as this is the first time she's felt anything other than contempt of the woman. Both of them are conspirators to the murder, to which they realize that nobody else in the house can figure out what happened. So, Melanie suggests taking what is left from the Yankee officer, which turns out to be quite a lot of valuable baubles, as well as some cold, hard cash. Scarlet pockets this, and then attempts to drag the guy out and bury him. However, as she does this, the guy is obviously leaving a massive blood trail behind. Melanie says that Scarlet should just drag out the body and that she'll clean up all the blood. Nobody will ever figure it out. The Union soldier is buried in a shallow grave, and nobody questions where this money came from, as well as the new horse and buggy. While it was pretty unpleasant, this turned out to be a fantastic blessing in disguise. Not only do they have money to be able to potentially buy some provisions for the nearby town, but now that they have a horse, they can go around to see if anybody is left. There is one house, the house of the Fontaines. They are so off the beaten path that the Union troops could not have found the house unless they were purposefully looking for it. Since the house was untouched, there's quite a spare amount of supplies that the Fontaines are able to give to Terra. And so this is able to keep them going for a while. But Grandma Fontaine wants to speak to Scarlet alone. She notices that the once delicate features have all of a sudden become the hands of a worker. Not only destroyed from the rains it took to be able to get that poor beast moving to Terra in the first place, but also the dirt under her fingernails. To which Grandma Fontaine tells a little bit of a story, saying that once you've experienced the worst of the worst, you're not really afraid of anything anymore. When she was young, a group of Native Americans burned down her house and murdered her parents while she was hiding away behind a bush. And from that day, she was never really afraid of anything, which I think there's something very profound in it. Even if Granny Fontaine is basically saying, yeah, women should always be afraid and meek of such things, but there is something to be said about experiencing the worst and then being less afraid with each passing time. About a month passes, when all of a sudden there is just the heavy trotting of hoofprints coming down the road. It is the Fontaines, warning everybody at Terra that the Union army is coming back and is ransacking everything. Everybody is able to get the provisions, as well as all the important people, out of Terra, and they escape into the nearby swamp. However, at the last minute, Scarlet does not want to leave Terra. As Gerald once said, Terra is very much the blood that is coursing through her veins. It is a part of her. And so, she makes a stand to be able to defend the house. As the Union troops come in, she is just a statue, simply waiting there as everybody is just simply ransacking the place, finding little secrets here and there. She is able to stand all of this until they decide to take Charles's grandfather's sword. That is the one thing she can't part with, as this was an heirloom that is promised to her son, Wade. There was quite a lot of back and forth about this, but as soon as it's realized that this sword was used in the Battle of San Juan, rather than part of the insurrection, It is given back to Scarlet. However, one of the Union troops is obviously not happy about it, as the hilt is solid gold and can fetch quite a pretty penny, and takes a lit log from the fire, and it slowly starts enveloping Tara in flames. Scarlet is desperate. She is trying everything she can to put out the fire, when all of a sudden the front doors open and Melanie comes in to assist her. Scarlet passes out, and when she awakes, she realizes that she is in the lap of Melanie. For the first time in her life, Scarlet has fainted and even is looking up to Melanie for a change. Tara is safe. So, all the people and all the supplies are brought back into Tara. However, that isn't the last time Tara has some visitors. They are also visited by a platoon of Confederate soldiers on Christmas Day, actually. There is a little bit of a party going around, and the food is scantily given, as Scarlet wants to make sure that there is enough for the people at Tara, and that the Confederate soldiers don't end up eating the provisions that they need to be able to survive. And there, Sue Ellen, by this time back to full health, is taking a liking to one of the officers known as Frank Kennedy. They hit it off for a bit, but the Confederates have to go on out to their next battle. It would be several months when the war was declared over, to which Scarlet takes this as just a huge sign of relief, as she doesn't have to worry about the Union soldiers ransacking the place, or the Confederate commissary saying, hey, you need to pay your part and be able to keep our soldiers healthy. However, that in itself became quite an issue as well. All that were left of the Confederates, most of them having only one leg, maybe one eye, one arm, slowly start making their way back home. And most of them find their way onto the front porch of Tara. And while Scarlet is perfectly fine to move on from the past, nobody else in the home is. And the old code dictates that you would never turn away a person that is in need of help. To which Scarlet has to begrudgingly agree, but she is just still upset that not only does she have to clean up all the dysentery, all the lice that these people bring in, but also the idea of the provisions that she has to be able to feed everybody, to which even she herself is taking half portions so nobody else would starve. But all that extra is given to these vagabonds. But there is one very interesting case that does come to Tara. A person who has definitely experienced the worst of the worst. He has no family to speak of, he still wants to keep on living. He gives the Reaper a middle finger, and that is pretty much the only thing that keeps him alive. This one takes considerably longer than all the other soldiers to heal, but at the same time, he's become a person that everybody confides in. Because he's seen the worst of the worst, he speaks in a very slow, monotone way. He doesn't cast judgment, he just takes everything in, and maybe even gives a little advice here and there. So Scarlet had become the head of the household. However, Will is able to give her quite a lot of information that Scarlet could have never figured out about any of these people. A little while passes, and a letter from the famous Uncle Peter. The letter states that Ashley is very much alive and is slowly making his way back down to Georgia. Now, since the Union officers aren't really giving him a carriage or much else, he just has to go on foot all the way from Illinois to Georgia. While Melanie and Scarlet are excited at the idea that Ashley is alive and is coming back to them, they realize that it's going to be a very long time before that happens. And that time does happen when everybody is just out enjoying the nice summer air, when they see what looks like another one of the Confederate refugees coming in. To which Scarlet's like, oh no, not another one we have to feed, another one we have to clean all the lice out of the dysentery. Wait a minute. That one very much looks familiar. While he very much has a very thick set of whiskers at this point, it is still undeniably the Ashley that everybody knows and loves. Melanie is the first to notice, and all of a sudden runs to embrace him. Scarlet wanted to do the same as well, when all of a sudden there is a strong arm on her shoulder holding her back, to which it is Will saying, "Well, that is her husband, isn't it?" Which Scarlet just has to freeze and let the moment pass. And that right there is part 3. I could definitely say I had a very hard time putting this down because, wow, the peril that the characters are just put into, it's just like, oh, how are they going to get out of this? I need to know what's going to be happening next. This is crazy. I wish I could say the same for the other parts, but I guess you got to get through all that boring exposition before you can get into the exciting adventure. Until next time, keep having fun.